This is an unusually good fight card for a boxing event, but I want to start off with Radzhab Butaev, 14 wins and 0 losses and 1 no contest, taking on Eimantas Stanionis, 13 wins, 0 losses, and 1 no contest. This is a fight that it matters a lot, even if the names of the fighters haven't elevated to the mainstream boxing consciousness just yet. Both of these guys are in the most, glamorous non-heavyweight division in boxing, although lightweight has obviously been making a ton of noise because a lot of the young talent that we have in the division, as well as the proven talent, or should I say longtime veteran talent like Vasily Lomachenko. But these are two welterweights. This is technically for a WBA regular welterweight title. I didn't even think to really mention the title because I feel like the title is actually irrelevant. This more or less puts them in position to fight for what Yordenis Ugas is currently holding and bringing into that fight with Errol Spence. So whoever wins this fight should be next in line as a mandatory for the WBA title, although all boxing fans are hoping that the winner of Errol Spence Jr. and Yordenis Ugas fights Terrence Bud Crawford for all 4 of the belts. But this is a hugely consequential fight between two young, up-and-coming prospects turned contenders in Butaev and Stanionis. To put this into perspective, you've had a recent kind of flushing of much of the top and near top of the welterweight division, whereas a year or two ago, you would have seen, Manny Pacquiao in there, Danny Garcia, who's been moved from the rankings. Manny Pacquiao's retired, and Sean Porter has retired. Keith Thurman was taken from the rankings for some time, and by rankings I'm talking about the Ring Magazine rankings, which is pretty much the most credible ranking standard that we have in boxing. But Keith Thurman was also removed, so that's Pacquiao, Danny Garcia, Sean Porter, and Keith Thurman, who has since reinserted into the rankings and is sitting at 6 since his return to the ring and his win over Mario Barrios. But in Butaev and Stanionis, even though Butaev is holding that lesser WBA welterweight title with his win over Jamal James just a few months ago, Stanionis is actually ranked above Butaev. So you've got Stanionis at 7 and then Butaev at 9. To put that into even more perspective, after the champions, you've got Terrence Crawford, Errol Spence, and Ugas, who are currently sitting at 1, 2, and 3. Then you've got the two super touted and highly hyped and, seemingly elite welterweight contenders in Jaron Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz Jr. You've got them sitting at 4 and 5, although Jaron Boots Ennis' biggest win, other than maybe Sergey Lipinets, is Thomas Delorme, who Stanionis recently beat via decision, even though Jaron Boots Ennis got him out of there, in like a round, even though it was a little bit controversial because it was like an arguable hit to the side or back of the head, which they try to file a motion to have that decision, that knockout ruling overturned. But anyway, 4 and 5 are held by Jaron Boots Ennis and Virgil Ortiz Jr. And then you've got Keith Thurman at 6. Then right after that, you've got Stanionis at 7. And then 2 spots down from that, you've got Butaev at 9. And it's actually Connor Benn, who's on Matchroom, who's basically unable to fight any of these guys that I mentioned because just about all of them, except for Terrence Bud Crawford, we'll see who he signs with. But everybody's basically PBC. They control the 90% of the elite talent in the welterweight division. Connor Benn is currently at 10, but he's kind of on the outside looking in. They're going to have to be very creative with his matchmaking. But Butaev and Stanionis are both about the same height. Butaev has him by about an inch. It's 5'10", or 2 inches. It's 5'10" versus 5'8". A 72-inch reach versus a 68-inch reach. So you actually have the longer Butaev against Stanionis. And Butaev is actually from Dagestan, Russia. For you MMA fans, that's where Khabib Nurmagomedov is from. And Stanionis is Lithuanian. Both of these guys are pressure fighters. Both of these guys throw some devastating hooks up top and to the body. If I were to compare their styles a little bit, I would say Butaev likes to turn it into a firefight a little bit earlier, whereas Stanionis tends to keep a tighter defensive construct. I think Butaev moves around a bit more. Stanionis is more like a patient hunter, kind of stepping forward with the high construct, looking to jab. He's got a very nice jab. He's kind of selective on when he lets the right hand go, but Stanionis loves to throw the left hook. That's kind of his signature punch. Butaev also has a devastating left hook. I mean, he dropped Terry Chatwood 2 fights ago and finished him with a hook to the body. And he was letting both his right and left hands go to the body, but it was a left hand to the body that finished Chatwood. I had mentioned that Butaev had one no contest. That no contest was actually 3 fights ago. It was initially ruled a decision win for Alexander Besputin, who had beaten Butaev via unanimous decision. So Besputin, at least to the eyes of the viewers and to the judges, outboxed Butaev to a unanimous decision win, but that was overturned because Besputin failed a drug test. Now, that loss turned no contest was Butaev's first fight that was scheduled beyond 8 rounds. He was fighting mostly, one that was scheduled for 10, but it was finished in the 3rd. He had gone the full 8 rounds once a few years ago, but other than that, all of his fights, besides one that went the 6-round distance, were all basically finished like in the 3rd round or earlier. So he didn't have any middle or late round experience at the time that he was seemingly outboxed by the, failed drug test taking Besputin. But Butaev is just very recently getting into anything beyond an 8-rounder. So he had that 12-rounder against Besputin that went the distance, the no contest, and then he knocked Terry Chatwood out in the 3rd round of a scheduled 10-round fight. And then he had the vacant WBA regular welterweight title bout against Jamal James. Now, that fight against Besputin was for the vacant belt, so Besputin had won that, but then he was stripped because of the failed drug test. That lesser WBA welterweight belt was up for grabs again in Jamal James versus Radzhab Butaev, and this resulted in a 9th round TKO for Butaev. That is by far his most credentialed win. Jamal James has fought some of the better fighters in the division, including beating Thomas Delorme. Not that Thomas Delorme is the elite in the division, but he's a fringe contender, we'll say. Well, Jamal James is like a very tall, kind of a sticker mover, right? He's not somebody who's just trying to hang out in the trenches and just go phone booth style fight. To relate that to one of Stanionis' fights, about 4 fights ago, Stanionis fought Justin DeLoach, another tall fighter who was banking some of the early rounds against Stanionis. Again, Stanionis is a very patient hunter, even though against Luis Collazo in his most recent fight, that was a no contest ending in the 4th due to an accidental head clash. That was Stanionis versus Luis Collazo. But against DeLoach was winning some of the early rounds, but it was Stanionis' game plan, more or less, and at the time, he was trained by Freddie Roach. He's currently trained by Freddie Roach's assistant trainer, Marvin Samodio. Before being trained by Roach, Samodio, Stanionis was actually trained by Ronnie Shields out in Texas, but he didn't love the Texas environment, ended up going to LA to get trained by Samodio, who was actually his original professional trainer. So he kind of came full circle there a little bit. But against Justin DeLoach, again, he was being patient, losing a couple of the early rounds, but kind of breaking him down over time in a similar way that Butaev was breaking down Jamal James over time. Again, I think Butaev tends to let his hands go a little bit earlier and more readily, where he's engaging in the firefight and therefore actually absorbing more blows. Stanionis keeps a tighter construct, works behind the jab, but is looking to close the distance and explode with his left hand hooked to the body and with his right hand once he feels comfortable enough to throw the right hand. He was kind of holding on throwing the right hand a little bit against Justin DeLoach until he knew he had Justin DeLoach in trouble. Then he started to unleash the right hand, which Sean Porter in the commentary was kind of calling for, saying, if you let the right hand go, that could be curtains. His trainer, Freddie Roach, was saying it as well, imploring him to let the right hand go. He eventually did and stopped Justin DeLoach in the 9th round. So both the Butaev versus Jamal James and Stanionis versus DeLoach fights ended in 9th round stoppages in scheduled 12-round fights. So you could kind of see their pressure style that's meant to break you down over time. So after Stanionis beat Justin DeLoach, he knocked out Janir Gonzalez in the 9th round in a scheduled 10-round fight, and then he fights Thomas Delorme. Thomas Delorme, again, has fought some of the best. He got knocked out by Radzhab Butaev. He was one of the guys who Terrence Crawford beat when he was unifying all 4 belts down at 140. Thomas Delorme was there. Thomas Delorme fought a competitive decision loss against Jamal James, and Thomas Delorme fought Stanionis very well, where, through 8, 9 rounds, even 10 rounds, it was pretty much anybody's guess who was up on the scorecards. It looked like Delorme was actually the better technical, sweet science style boxer, whereas Stanionis looked like the guy who was trying to be the pressure that busts pipes. You know what I mean? So Delorme was winning several of the early and middle rounds against Stanionis, but Stanionis came on very strong in the 10th, 11th, and 12th round, visibly hurting Thomas Delorme, cutting him. It was arguable whether it was a headbutt or a punch that caused the headbutt, but he started to really put a beating on Thomas Delorme in the last couple of rounds, to where if it was an even fight through 10, then that last couple rounds performance would have put Stanionis over the top. As it stood, the actual scorecards were 115-113, 116-112, and 117-111, all in favor of Stanionis. So you could see, based on that 115-113 and 116-112, that it was really anybody's fight after the first 10 rounds. So we've seen Butaev get outboxed by Besputin. Again, ruled a no contest, so how much can you make out of it if Besputin was proven to be taking a drug at the time? It was Ligandrol, which is a substance prohibited by VADA, but he was outboxed in that case against Besputin, asterisk by that. And Stanionis, we saw him box very competitively by Thomas Delorme. So those were 2 step-up fights, and then again, they both fought kind of like the tall, rangy, mover type fighters. Butaev in beating Jamal James in his most recent fight, that was October 2021, and again, Stanionis against Justin DeLoach in November 2020. And Stanionis in his most recent fight in August of 2021, that was the 4-round no contest due to the head clash against longtime veteran, 40-year-old at the time of the fight, Luis Collazo. And Stanionis was really putting a beating on Collazo, but Collazo did start to fight back and batter him to the body, batter Stanionis to the body a bit, kind of showing a lot of like the old man savvy, where it might have been interesting going into the middle rounds, might not have been, but we know, Collazo is as game and as crafty as they come. I remember when Collazo badly hurt Keith Thurman to the body, where Keith Thurman was dancing around the ring trying to buy time because of how badly he was hurt to the body. Several years before that, I thought Collazo might have edged the decision win over Ricky Hatton, and he's even fought in Shane Mosley. So Luis Collazo is one of the most tested in the game. But again, he was 40 years old, and that fight didn't go beyond the 4th round due to that head clash. So it's tough to really make too much of it because we don't really know where that fight was headed, although it appeared that Stanionis was on his way to a win. Whether that was going to be a decision win or a stoppage, who knows? But what do I expect out of Butaev and Stanionis? I tend to think that Stanionis has slightly better defense. I wonder if Butaev is going to be as antsy to get into a firefight with somebody with the power of Stanionis. We know what doesn't appear to be working against Stanionis, and that is letting Stanionis kind of dictate the terms of the exchange and letting him walk you down. So my question is, what if Butaev tries to back Stanionis up? Like, instead of circling and trying to stay out of harm's way, trying to buy time behind a jab, what if he tries to really put Stanionis on the defensive? Because Butaev, again, he doesn't wait too long to get the party started. He's not afraid to really start letting the fireworks go in the 1st and 2nd round. Stanionis, again, that Collazo fight aside, usually starts to slowly cook over time, very patient behind the jab. So I expect Butaev to win the early rounds here. The question is Stanionis' pressure style going to be enough to put Butaev on the defensive, where his output is reduced and he starts being a little bit more reluctant to just let both hands go. Because again, he wants to turn the temperature up, but he just does so a little bit more quickly than Stanionis. I expect, again, Butaev to win the early rounds. I expect Stanionis to start popping Butaev with the jab. I think Butaev is going to be hitting Stanionis with more right hands than Stanionis is hitting Butaev with. But this really has the potential to be a barn burner of an exciting fight, depending on how they react to one another's styles. You know, I kind of think that Stanionis is going to be shown to be the lesser mover, even though some people might think that he is the better technical boxer out of the two. I think Butaev might be the slightly better athlete, just movement-wise and kind of the angles that he's throwing the punches-wise. Like, he looks like he's letting his hands go a little bit more freely, whereas Stanionis throws tighter punches. So I wonder if the tightness of Stanionis' punches are going to allow them to connect with Butaev a lot more cleanly. But I also wonder whether Butaev's energy and activity level is going to be enough to back Stanionis up repeatedly. You know, I'm actually going to go Stanionis via close, pretty disputed decision. You know, betting wise, the odds here are basically as 50-50 as I've seen. I think last time I checked it, like, they were both going off at like a plus 110, which is like dead even. So it's really anybody's guess what gives here, because it's one of those, what, unstoppable force meets the immovable object, or however that's phrased. But both of these guys are so young in their career. I mean, we've got, 15 fights for Butaev, 14 fights for Stanionis. So both of these guys are working up the ranks very quickly. They've only been professionals for about 5 years in total now, and have only recently started working above 6 to 8 round fights. So the fact that you're getting, like, even though Butaev is holding that lesser belt, we'll call them both contenders. You're getting these prospect turned contenders, these rising talents in the division who are basically just a step, at least rankings-wise, behind Radzhab Butaev and Vergil Ortiz Jr., who everybody is looking out for. It's interesting that you're getting these two forces colliding so early in their careers, where one guy's going to go this way, the other guy's going to have to take a step back and reassess, depending on the result of this fight. But I'm going to go with the tightness of Stanionis' defensive construct and the crispness in how he deploys his left hand, his left hook to the body specifically. I think Butaev, again, gets hit a little bit more than Stanionis, even though Stanionis was getting hit a lot versus Thomas Delorme. But I think that the way that Butaev engages leaves him open to getting hit crisply. The question is, does Stanionis have the skills to catch Butaev as Butaev keeps on jumping into the pocket, letting his hands go? Can Stanionis time him with that left hand and make him pay a toll, either with the left hook or even more readily with the consistent left jab? I'm looking for Stanionis' left jab here to ultimately be the difference and to allow Stanionis to edge. And I mean edge. We're talking 115, 113-ish. Butaev, man, damn, is there going to be a knockdown here? Who is more likely to knock the other down? Both of these guys appear to throw pretty damn hard. Again, Butaev stopped Jamal James in the 9th round. But I'm going to go with Stanionis via close decision. I can't wait for this one, and it's obviously going under the radar. I love that they positioned this fight on the Spence Ugas undercard. They're doing the right thing in the matchmaking in that 147-pound division. They just need to make sure that after Spence Ugas, that the winner fights Terrence Bud Crawford. That's what needs to happen, and these guys need to basically wait a sec. The winner of this, I don't think, should get a straight shot at the title. Maybe if they want to wait it out and wait for the rest of the 147 title business to be handled. But I would love to see one of these guys, for instance, fight either Radzhab Butaev or Vergil Ortiz Jr. We don't know if Vergil Ortiz Jr. is going to be able to stick around at 147. The rumor is that he's having tons of difficulty making weight. I mean, he just had to pull out of his last fight against McKinson due to some health issues. So we'll see if Vergil Ortiz is even able to stick around at welterweight. But if he's able to, I would love to see some of these prospect turned contenders mix it up. Very exciting division. and I can't wait for this Butaev versus Stanionis fight. So now let's get into Isaac Cruz versus Yorkis Gamboa.